I hope you're like me and you have fond memories of summer holidays as kids, going away to those marvellous seaside places with your family. I think for me it was the Isle of Wight. We went there a few years running from my early teenage years, and very nice memories of golden beaches, Shanklin, Blackgang Chine, amusement parks, ice cream, and all the rest of it. However, there are some seaside places that we might say are less salubrious and welcoming, and yet they continue to attract us and draw us in. In fact, you might say once they've got their hooks into you, you'll never leave. Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth, we return to Innsmouth. Hi, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today for this return to Innsmouth, and I'm looking at making some more scatter terrain for my Innsmouth build. Now, you may remember I've sort of, well, I say finished this project a few months ago. When does a modeler or wargamer ever finish a project? That's a bit like asking a musician, has he finished that song? So, the bulk of it was done, all the buildings and everything else. But I've got some events coming up this year. In fact, I've got one coming up this week, tomorrow, as this goes out. Saturday, the 7th and 8th of March in Bedford, we have the Bedford Tabletop Expo. Normally, I'm there as a trader. This year, I thought I'd put on my We Want the Gold fantasy skirmish game. And of course, I chose to do the Innsmouth scenario. So I've got all my Innsmouth buildings and everything else that I've used before, but I just thought the board always needs spicing up a little bit with some scatter terrain. So that's what we're going to be looking at making today. If, by the way, you can't make Bedford, but you're near Milton Keynes, then on the Saturday, that's the 7th, tomorrow of March, there's Concrete Cow in Wolverton, just outside Milton Keynes. That's a one-day RPG event. Well, it starts in the morning and goes all the way through to the night. That's an excellent event if you want to get along and try out some RPGing as well. So that's two great events this weekend. Let's have a look at what I've been able to build. I'm going to start with a large fence, sort of large plank fence. I've got these long matchsticks, are going to be the sort of supports across, and I've got these long and thin sort of loddy sticks, I suppose we call them. I can probably get at least 2 planks out of these because as you can see, they're quite high. So the first job is to cut these down to size. I'm going to make them a little bit irregular as well because this is Innsmouth after all. And I don't know, I think the surface is actually okay. I'll get a little bit of grain off of that. But if I need to, I can always sandpaper those or maybe use the knife just to give a little bit more texture on the surface there. So, sharp knife, and I'm going to start cutting these in half and trimming off the ends. So it turns out that even a heavy-duty Stanley knife was not good enough to cut through this quite thin wood. So I had to use the scissors, as you no doubt noticed there. Not to worry. I've got 2 or 3 planks out of each of those. So what I'm going to do now is use these long matchsticks as the kind of support frame. And because these are joined in the middle, I want to make sure this joint is quite strong. So my first board, I'm going to stick right in the middle there. So that will hopefully keep both of those together. But let me just line these up properly at first. Of course, the good thing with the grid on this mat is I can make sure that everything is lined up. And let's just take a couple of these just to make sure that, yep, that's about the right spacing. So, standard wood glue from B&M, who I really should get a sponsorship deal with, the amount of promotion I do for them on these videos. And let's just put our first one slap bang in the middle there. Boom, there we go. Now it doesn't matter if they don't quite match up at the ends, because I can always just trim the ends of those off. And already I'm having a slight issue, because as I'm pressing that down, those matchsticks are moving. So actually I think what I'm going to do is just tape the ends of those down just to stop those moving. Let me just find my tape. So yeah, I've just taken that central plank off to make sure I've got the middle lined up. So I'll just reapply some glue there and put that central one back in place. There we go, that's better. So now I've got that one done, I just need to add in the rest. That's our first section glued in place then. And as I said, the good thing always with Innsmouth is I don't have to be too precise. It works much better if everything looks a little bit higgledy-piggledy, which is just as well, because that's how it all turns out when I try this stuff anyway. So that's section number 1 done. I'm going to put that to one side. I'll just put something on top of it to keep a little bit of pressure on, and then I'll start making up some more sections in the same way. While I'm waiting for those fence pieces to dry, I'm going to cut out some bases, and for this I'm using my old standby, the vinyl floor tiles. These are great because they're very thin, just a couple of mil, and they're very sticky on one side. Of course I'll glue stuff in anyway, but these make excellent bases for figures, for terrain, and they're pretty cheap to pick up as well. I think you get a pack of like a dozen for about £8 or something like that. So I'm just going to have a quick measure up, and then I'll cut out some strips for this. We're going to use some clay or maybe some polyfiller just to make some ground, and then we'll put those fences into there once they've dried. Now with this plastic fencing, I'm going to make a base for that as well. It's open on one side, so that will butt up against a house or a building. And this is going to be some sort of garden perhaps, or an allotment. I figure even in Innsmouth, they eat their vegetables, right? They eat their greens. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what form that is going to take at the moment, but I'll get another vinyl base cut out to put this fencing on. Now, I did also mention I wanted to make a well. Well, here we are. Well. I'm using an old Tamiya paint pot, and I'm going to put this clay on the outside of it. It's a splendid colour, that, isn't it? I'm kind of loath to paint that, really. That's a wonderful Innsmouth colour. But anyway, I'm going to put that around the outside. Then using one of my tools, I'll just carve in the stone shapes so it look like a stone well. Not sure what I'm going to do with the inside yet. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So let me get this clay set around the edge first of all. So everything is put together now, and most of it is undercoated. I've just got to do the well. I forgot to do that. I've coated the fences grey, and I was going to paint these white, but I did find a little bit of white matte left in there, so I'm going to use that. It's a bit quicker, a bit less messy. And then I'll put the Innsmouth wash over these and some flocking on the bases. For the garden come allotment, I've sprayed that now as well. I've built up the groundwork a little bit. We'll have a path down the middle there from the gate, and I've used matchsticks to make these sort of borders. So these are going to be the vegetable patches. Not sure what sort of vegetables are going in there yet, but I'll get the fence painted and then start to put some flock down on the ground there. I've done some hedges with the remainder of my horsehair, and with a few sort of off bits I had left over, I've made some bushes as well. Again, they're just on the vinyl bases stuck on. All they need is some flocking and then some varnish on to hold everything in place. And I also found I had some logs as well. So I've made a couple of log piles. There we go. Oh, and I've got to also paint my pentagram, because there is a ritual involved, as you might expect in this scenario, of course, so we're going to need that. Now, there's one or two other things I just need to put together as well. We've got some plastic buckets and bits and pieces, so I also need to sort those out. I did want to do some more. I wanted to make a clothesline with some clothes on, because I have got some sort of lead foil, lead sheet that I was going to cut out into clothing, and I was going to make a sort of washing line to put those on. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to have time to do those, because time's pretty short this week. I've got our first gaming session of our Mothership campaign. That's happening tomorrow night. I've got a lot of prep to do for that. And on Friday, the day before Bedford Tabletop Expo, I'm going to be out most of the day. So I'd rather get all this stuff finished rather than try and put a couple of other bits in and sort of not get any of it finished. Oh, the other thing I wanted to add in as well is an outhouse. I saw a very nice clip up on YouTube of how to make an outhouse. Let's face it, if you're in Innsmouth, you're going to need a toilet at some point. But again, I'll have to save that for next time. Okay, let's get these fences sprayed up, then we'll get onto our flock and our washes. So I used that can of spray to get the white undercoat, and yeah, it was very messy because the nozzle was quite clogged, and it came out with a distinctly pinkish tone as well. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, I've probably had that can for about 6 months or so, not a huge amount of time. I do find this with cans, even if you buy the same brand, the quality from can to can does seem to vary a bit. I guess that's what happens when you buy cheap stuff, right? So I did end up brushing over with white anyway. So, having done that, we're now going to add our Innsmouth wash to suitably grime things up. And I uploaded a video on how I made this a little while ago, so do check that out. We've got our nice green gloop there. There's some ink and other bits and pieces in there. And the nice thing with this is you can put it on pretty heavy, pretty thick, and it dries to a nice consistency and cover. So it looks like here I'm painting this whole thing green now, but once that dries off, then a lot of it, I guess the water just evaporates and you're left with the green gunky stuff. Now you may remember that one other thing I was going to do for the Innsmouth build was cobbled streets, and I didn't really have time to do that before. I've got all the kit here for it, rubber matting and all the silicone gel and everything else, but it's quite a time consuming process, that one. Last time I borrowed a mat from Bedford Gladiators, which was like a medieval battle mat. What I've done here is I bought this cobbled mat. Now it's not bad, it's quite a thin mat, it was fairly cheap, so it's going to do in a pinch, and then that will give me time to work up some proper cobbles. But I think with everything in place, this is going to do the job nicely. There's our allotment patch with the attendant gardener. I've got the hedges, the fences, there's the well with the colour out of space inside. We've got our pentagram, our ritual circle standing amidst the stones, and the rest of our fencing and other bits and pieces over here. There we go then. Not quite as much finished as I would have liked, but it's been a very busy week, what with one thing and another. I launched my mothership campaign this week, so there's been the prep for that. And also, of course, because I'm running the game over the weekend, I need to sort out character sheets, spell cards, and all the other bits and pieces that go alongside it. But I feel, if nothing else, we've got a very nice setting and board to fight over. Does this mean the Innsmouth build is finished? No, of course not. Of course not. I want to get those other little bits done. And as I'm planning to go out and do more conventions this year and more demo games for We Want the Gold, I'm thinking, right, we've got a graveyard, we've got Innsmouth Town Centre, maybe Innsmouth Docks. That might be a good setting, particularly once we get into my next version of We Want the Gold, which moves from fantasy to modern. So it's going to be a modern horror skirmish game. I mean, Innsmouth is great because you can set it in any time period or setting, really. So yeah, we're going to be doing a modern game. Hopefully that's going to be ready for the Innsmouth Literary Festival, September the 19th, later this year. And that will mark the attempt for some players to try and get on board the Innsmouth bus, which you may remember I put one of those together and painted up a little earlier. That's up here on the channel. Or, of course, because this is We Want the Gold, you may be the aggrieved locals or deep ones who are trying to stop them. I'm sure for very good reasons. I'm sure you just want to be friendly and say hello and, you know, maybe welcome them to stay in Innsmouth for a little longer. Anyway, I'm going to get all that stuff packed away now so I can take it down to bed for tomorrow. And I'd be very interested to hear in your ideas for Innsmouth terrain, whether that's scatter terrain or that's another board, marshes perhaps. I think there was a railway station, an old railway station in the original story. So there's a few things percolating around in there. Do let me know. As always, if you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe. And I'll see you in Innsmouth.